So the last thing we're going to talk about in section 4.4 before we take our factoring quiz is a pattern for factoring a special case. Okay? It's factoring a special case. It's called the difference of two squares. Okay? Or the difference of two perfect squares, if you want to think of it that way. What we have, first off, difference means subtraction in math. So we are subtracting two perfect squares. They tell us that if we have any binomial that is set up like this, okay? If we have any binomial that is set up in the form a squared minus b squared, that binomial can always be factored into two binomials, a plus b times a minus b. Always, every time. Okay, of course it has to be subtraction. That's why it's called the difference of perfect squares. Okay? So, why? Well, let me show you real quick what happens if I start with a plus b times a minus b. If that's my two binomials. Let's go ahead and FOIL. So, a times a is a squared. A times negative b is a negative ab. B times a is a positive ab, and b times negative b is a negative b squared. If I look for like terms, I actually have two like terms, negative ab and positive ab. If I add them together, if I have negative 1ab and a positive 1ab, what do I get when I add them together? I get 0. They cancel each other out, right? So those go away. And I end up with a squared minus b squared. So, what this is telling us is, hey guys, if you start with this and they ask you to factor it, just write it like that. Okay? That's our pattern. If you have a squared minus b squared, it factors into a binomial a plus b times a binomial a minus b. Okay? So, let's take a look at this in what it's actually going to look like. All right, what is this actually going to look like? For example, number 13. Okay, for number 13, you might be saying, well, wait a minute, only the x is being squared right now. They're not two squares. But actually there are. There are. We can rewrite 9x squared as something squared. We can rewrite it as 3x quantity squared. Because remember, 3x times 3x gives us 9x squared, right? Okay, well I want to rewrite 4, so I got minus something squared. Well, how can I rewrite 4? 2 squared, right? 2 squared. So this is my a value, and this is my b value. So 3x is the a, and 2 is the b. So remember, it goes into the pattern. If I have a squared minus b squared, I get a plus b times a minus b. So this means, set up my binomials here. This means I'm going to have 3x plus 2 times 3x minus 2. The two binomials can be switched around, absolutely. But you have to have a 3x plus 2 and a 3x minus 2 inside the binomials. Yep, if you had 3x minus 2 times 3x plus 2 written down, perfect. It's the exact same thing. Okay? But that's the setup. One binomial is going to be plus, one's going to be minus. Questions? Anytime you have a difference of perfect squares, it's always going to work this way. Let's try another one. What if we have 25x squared minus 9? Well, first off, we have to identify it as a difference of perfect squares. So, is it subtraction?
Yes.
Yes. Do we have two perfect squares? Okay, 25 is definitely a perfect square, and x squared is obviously a perfect square. But how do I rewrite 25x squared as one thing squared?
5x.
5x quantity squared is how we read that. Yep. 5x, that quantity, squared. Okay, minus, well then, how do I rewrite the 9? 3 squared. Well, since there's only one thing, you can just say 3 squared. Yep. So 3 squared. So your a value in this is what? For the pattern, the a in the pattern. 5x is the a, and what's the b? 3. So it's going to be a plus b times a minus b. That's your answer. Sometimes you might see 2 variables involved. Don't freak out. It's the same thing. What if we have 9x squared minus 16y squared? Is it a difference?
Not really.
Well, okay, I didn't ask, is there a difference? Is it a difference? Is it subtraction?
Yeah.
Yes, it's subtraction. Okay. Now, can I rewrite both of those terms as perfect squares, as something squared? How do I rewrite 9x squared as being something squared? 3x. 3x quantity squared gives me 9x squared. Any questions on how or why? How about 16y squared? Yeah, it's just 4y quantity squared. And now that we have that identified, we simply follow the pattern. Our a value is 3x. Our b value is 4y. So we get 3x plus 4y times 3x minus 4y. And that's it. Questions? Okay, then I would like to see you guys. Let's work this guy. 16x squared minus 81. I want you to work it with your neighbor if you need, otherwise by yourself. Go. So I saw lots of good answers here. What you should have been doing is rewriting 16x squared as 4x quantity squared. Then you have that minus sign there. We got to rewrite 81 as something, squared. And that something is 9. 9 squared is 81. So we end up with binomial 4x plus 9 times a second binomial 4x minus 9. That is our answer.